Appreciate you being here with me in this What is Bridges Out of Poverty session. My plan for the session, first of all, is get to know a little bit about you. We have 2 polls to do that, to help us with that. And secondly, I'm thinking I will talk. I'm pretty much going to just talk for 45 minutes and give an overview of the Bridges lens and just a little bit about what's happened with Bridges since it was first published in the year 2000. And how it came about, just a little bit about how, introductory, how it came about. So hopefully you're in the right session and this is new to you, but we are going to ask you to write your questions in the chat. We probably won't have anybody have a microphone other than me today. So if you would write your questions actually in the questions box at about 15 minutes to 10 till the hour, I will probably stop talking and look at your questions and see what responses I can bring to you to give you more clarity. So Leonard's going to help us with the first poll, if we could put that up. And is the poll up? It's distributing. Can you see the poll? Okay, good. So we are looking at what is this poll? I can't see the title of it, unfortunately. You're just beginning, you have no experience with Bridges Out of Poverty, or you're just beginning, or you've been working with Bridges 1 to 3 years. I see it now. I see it now. Some of you must know something about Bridges if you've been working with it for 4 to 6 years. Sometimes people join us in these What is Bridges Out of Poverty sessions so that they can sort of use similar approaches when they're presenting to their communities. So maybe that's a possibility here. But about half of you have no experience with Bridges at all. And Leonard's going to put up the next poll. Thank you, Leonard. And the next poll is about which sector you would work in, so that we can see which sectors are represented here today. Which of the following best describes the sector in which you work? Okay. We're collecting responses. Okay. And so can the participants see the responses now? Yes, so 46% of you in education of some sort, either early childhood, I'm assuming, K-12, or in some sort of community or higher education. And then no one from courts and law enforcement, just a few from business, some folks from health, which is great, and 46%, about half of you from social services. So that helps out a lot, and it also helps us to know who is attracted to Bridges in general and what we need to do in order to spread the word in all the sectors. So let's go ahead and begin. So I've got my PowerPoint up here. And again, the questions box is there for you. I probably won't glance at it too much during this presentation, but towards the end of the presentation, we will address some of those questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, I just want to explain to you why I have 3 works here on the What is Bridges Out of Poverty opening slide. It's very difficult to talk about Bridges Out of Poverty without talking about getting ahead in a just getting by world and bridges to sustainable communities. So basically what happened is Ruby Payne wrote a framework for understanding poverty for schools to give schools a better understanding of the environment of poverty that children may be living in, and parents, and also addressing how middle class schools are. And as we came to work with this, Phil Duvall and I began to see that it wasn't just schools who were very sort of middle class in their orientation, and we'll be talking about that in a few moments and what that means. Basically, just in a nutshell, the middle class environment is stable in the present, and therefore you have the opportunity to look towards your future story and what you need to achieve in order to get to a positive and stable future story. So schools, businesses, one of our key points is schools, businesses, associations, organizations, law enforcement's court tend to be very middle class in their approach. And Ruby saw that there was a gap between what students' goals and priorities and relationships were like that were coming from environments of poverty, comparing it to what it's like in more stable environments. And she thought that there needed to be sort of a bridge there. So Phil Duvall and I again found her work and began to apply it in the community setting. And Ruby asked us to co-author Bridges Out of Poverty with her so that all sectors could have the opportunity of this understanding of the environments and the hidden rules of those environments and how we can best use that to build relationships of trust and mutual respect and learn from one another. So after about, well, in 2004, Getting Ahead and Just Getting By World was first published by Phil Duvall. And this is sort of the Bridges Out of Poverty for individuals who are in environments in poverty. Could be situational poverty, often is folks who are generational poverty, which is 2 or more generations. It's sort of a sitting around the kitchen table and looking at the same lens I'm going to be showing you today and talking about how that lens has an impact on my life. What we found is that for people who are in under-resourced environments, there needs to be a setting where no one's telling you what to do and where you have time to apply the information personally to your life. If you are in situations in poverty, this makes way more sense than just coming to a professional development training on bridges and just getting all of these concepts one after another in very quick setting in the modules. And what happens within Getting Ahead is that individuals in poverty also have access to the lens and have an opportunity to create social capital and to look at their own goals. And sort of the main thing, I think, is get out of that tyranny of the moment, which poverty drives us into, and have a time to think and to reflect about what you want in your life, what motivates you, and what your resources are, both externally and internally. And then, in the best setting possible, your community surrounds you as you begin this process of walking towards stability. And then that brings us to Bridges to Sustainable Communities, which Phil wrote, for communities who are interested at the decision-making table at the community level to use bridges to impact the current great stuff you're already doing, I should say, and the goals and objectives of your community. I think one of the main points is that the two are linked, that Getting Ahead, they're all linked. Getting Ahead and Bridges to Sustainable Communities are linked because many times at our community decision-making tables or our institutional decision-making tables, people in poverty are absent. But because of Getting Ahead, it gives people an insight and an opportunity to make those connections, to be at the decision-making table. So you should have at your decision-making table all economic classes, as well as all races, genders, ages, etc., in your community represented. So that is sort of an overview of what has happened with Bridges Out of Poverty. I will say that 80,000 people have completed Getting Ahead in a Just Getting By world. So we're not just talking about a few thousand people. It's having a great impact, and it has very positive evaluation outcomes. Excuse me just a second. And so we have several studies. One is the Waller study, that's spelled W-A-H-L-E-R, and you can find that study at AHA Process. And what the study does is track people's outcomes in terms of gaining stability, jobs, maybe getting their kids back, getting a GED, getting a college education, whatever their goals are. We track that for 6 months, 1 year, a year and a half, and compare how people are doing. And there's a significant change in about 80% of those who go through Getting Ahead. So it's on its way, I believe, we all believe, to becoming an evidence-based curriculum. And Dr. Waller also believes that, who is the researcher. So in a matter of time, we'll have that to report to you. But you can find that study online now. And it's really good to be inclusive of people in poverty and not just, quote unquote, the smart middle class, and in representing the Bridges lens. So I'm sure there's some questions about that, but let's look at how Bridges moves and grows. So what we're going to be looking at is let me see where, this is what we're going to be looking at just momentarily. So basically what has happened is that people from all sectors, including education, have looked at the Bridges lens, have studied the Bridges lens, have worked on it and tried to figure out, what does this mean in our sector? What does this mean in our work? What does it mean in our personal lives and our relationship with others? And so basically what the 4-part story structure is if you want to think through this today, what's it like right now at your institution, let's say, in terms of working with individuals in poverty? Where do you have the good outcomes? Where are the struggles and the challenges? So what is happening right now? And then as you look at the Bridges lens, maybe you will have what we call an aha moment. This is number 2. What was the Bridges insight that made you think maybe it's possible that we need to change something? Maybe something as in our one-on-one engagement with individuals who come through our services or who are a part of our team. Maybe it is an institutional change that just really doesn't make sense when you look at the population that of what it's like to be in environments of poverty, that population. Or maybe there are some community and policy changes that you say, this isn't making sense. So what do we need to do? And then what are the first steps that you will take? And then as you complete the 4-part story structure, over time, you'll have different outcomes. You may have a different way of doing business. You may have different relationships with individuals from different economic classes. So this is basically how Bridges has moved and grown. And I think that most of us who are involved in this Bridges work for over 20 years, and many who are new to it, see that it has become a movement. It has become something that is bigger than we ever thought, and it takes on its own energy, if you will. And one of the reasons for this is our communities of practice. So what happens is that people in all different sectors in 9 countries have taken the Bridges lens and done amazing things with it. Things that Ruby Payne, Phil, and I have never thought of, because they've applied it and adapted it in very new ways. That newness creates an energy that is shared with other individuals and other sectors and other countries, and it's sort of taken on a world of its own. So here's the 4-part story structure. So as you think about this today, think about what's it like right now in working with individuals in poverty. What is our organization like? In other words, how middle class is it? And is there a lack of coherence here, or is there a gap here? In other words, do our services actually make sense for the population in which they are designed? Then think about today, what are the things that I'm talking about that actually snap in your brain that you say that's something that we need to change? And then number 3 and 4 hopefully take place following today. And I do have my email address at the end of the presentation so that you can see how to contact me if you have any other questions. I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about this study. And if you can see right here that Jindra, this is right in the second paragraph, Jindra and Jindra from Notre Dame University completed a study of Bridges as well as Getting Ahead. And it was a small study. There were only 38 folks in the study. The Waller study is much, much larger, a very large group of study of Getting Ahead. But these are researchers who like to take small studies and have more focus groups as well as more qualitative research. So this is their niche. So they did this on their own because South Bend, Indiana is one of our longest and richest, if you will, Bridges communities, right there where Notre Dame University is. So that's how they heard of it, with their connections from South Bend, Jindra and Jindra. But I just want to come to the conclusions that they had. They took 38 individuals and they tracked them. And when they found out that about half of them, about 8 or 9 of them from generational poverty actually had great outcomes and improvements from going through Getting Ahead. And about 8 or 9 of them from situational poverty, which is very recent poverty, had that same impact. And then there were some who had some challenges. So it was a small group study, but what they said about Bridges is what interests me. So this top this top bullet, many academics argue for policy change to lower poverty and inequality. Hold on a second. Yet this top-down view often ignores and underestimates the challenges presented by life situations of those who haven't been socialized into the particular mode of stability, productivity. In other words, they may be marginalized by their community. And so when you have communities that have populations that are marginalized, it's just not healthy for the community. It's actually not healthy at all, especially for those who are marginalized, but for the community at large. But what they're saying here is you can change policy at the top, but you have to have a relational model for how communities connect with one another. And you cannot marginalize populations and have a community that is connected. You might think it's connected, but it's not really the connection that you're looking at, the connection that's going to impact the most change. So basically what they're saying is segregation, isolation, marginalization, you got to break down those barriers. And that's what gives people more tools. And what we see now across the country, and it's just sort of a movement that has emerged on its own, and it may or may not have anything to do with bridges, but you see that people are not satisfied with just donating clothes, writing a check, or going down and ladling out soup once a month at city mission. People have a desire to come more closely towards the individuals in poverty and the individuals who have other populations that have been marginalized. And we call that coming shoulder to shoulder with folks in poverty. So we know that the Bridges lens focuses primarily on economic class, but that race, gender, orientation, and other aspects of our community, other populations of our community also need this representation. But for the rest of today, we're going to talk about economic class barrier and how to begin to think about breaking down those barriers and coming along shoulder to shoulder with individuals in poverty. In viewing the economic lens issues of how do you apply bridges, we look at 3 or 4 different ways. So as a professional, you may be thinking, I'm mostly working one-on-one. Maybe I'm a nurse and most of my population I'm working with are from generational poverty because I work in a clinic, a free clinic. And so what I'm looking for is, what do I need to change in the patient engagement or at the individual level? So that would be the individual level. In the institutional level, we had 250 dentists who were part of a group called Advantage Dental. And what they realized was that people in poverty, they had the entire Medicare and Medicaid population, they had the contract for that in the state. What they found was that there were hidden rules in poverty towards oral health that were different than the perspective in middle class. And one of the things that was happening is people would not make an appointment and were not really interested in preventive care, but would show up with a big swelled up infection in their mouth, and they'd show up and want an appointment immediately. And their institutions just were not gauged for this, so they'd have to send people to the emergency department. I didn't realize this, but a lot of what goes on in emergency departments is due to oral health emergencies. In fact, in one of their counties, that was the #1 reason people were going to the emergency department. Everyone here knows that's very expensive for all of us, and especially for health institutions. So they decided that they were not really going to change the fact that people in poverty were living in the now and would show up when they couldn't stand it anymore, that they were not making appointments in advance, they were not using preventive care. How did they come to this understanding? They came to it through Bridges Out of Poverty. If it hadn't been for that, they would have just been gone, well, what is wrong with people that they would wait until they're in this kind of pain to show up without an appointment? So that's the way it was for them. So what they decided to do, which was somewhat costly, is add a 3rd chair in every one of those dentists' office so that there was a walk-in chair, and they called it the urgent chair. That's a pretty major institutional change. And what happened was the people would come and the receptionist would now say, not go to the emergency department, but he would say, have a seat. We'll see you in an hour and a half. So this is great in terms of saving money for the health system. But while that person is sitting there, someone comes out and begins to build trust and make a relationship of mutual respect. And maybe talk about preventive care and also some motivational interviewing. What an opportunity. So I would like you to think about this. When do you have those intersections where you actually see people? Make the most of those moments at the individual level, but also are there some institutional changes that might make sense if you're working with middle class, future story folks who are in stable environments who love prevention because it's going to avoid us ever having a problem, right? Or are you going to design your institution for the people, for the population that's the best fit? You're going to design your institutional change to fit your population, is what I'm trying to say. Communities have changed, and primarily there are communities who use bridges to have an impact coalition, to have everyone seated at the table, to use bridges as a common understanding with common models and language to do even better work than they're doing together. If you think about all of our sectors, we have very different formal language register. We have different acronyms. We sometimes don't communicate very well. We have different goals and objectives. Bridges gives all those sectors an opportunity to come together with the same language and models in addressing inequities in our community. And finally, to advocate for policy change. So again, remembering what Ginger and Ginger's research said, we can advocate for policy change, but we also have to have some sort of relational model to do business differently and more inclusively on the ground in our communities. So has Bridges affected policy? Yes, it has. In several states, one is Oklahoma and the other is Ohio. And so if you'd like more information on that, just let me know. But that won't be part of what we're talking about here today. I wanted to show you the mental model for poverty. This is a cross-section of responses in our Getting Ahead groups. And remember, these are folks in poverty come together for 15 to 20 weeks to start engaging in what is my life, what is life about, and what are the environments in which we live. I'm going to back up just a moment because I think I skipped a very important slide, but it's not there. So I'm just going to tell you about what we're doing here. So first, we're going to look at the environments that have an impact on us as individuals as well as communities in our nation. We're going to look at the environments, as I said earlier, of economic class. Then we're going to look at what causes poverty. That's part of the Bridges lens. I've been told by several high-ranking administrators that it is politically incorrect to talk about economic class, and I ponder this and I wonder about this because this is what I do every day. Why is it considered politically incorrect to talk about economic class? And you will find there's a hesitation, there's a discomfort. It's almost like talking about religion and politics. I think it's because primarily our communities and sometimes our organizations believe that people have made choices that cause them to be in poverty. So we're going to be looking at, is that true? And it is true. But what else is causing poverty? If that is in your mind or your paradigm, the only reason that people are in poverty, yes, you're going to be hesitant to talk about poverty and economic class because you're comparing choices, but it's much more than that. And I will show you briefly what the 4 causes of poverty are today. The other thing I'd like to talk to you about as we look at this is that these environments, which we show in pie charts, we have models for each in economic class environment, poverty, middle class, and wealth. Each of these environments has its own set of resources, right? And it has its own set of priorities and has its own set of how you do business, whether it's surviving or thriving or maintaining and growing great wealth or connections. So out of these environments comes hidden rules. So hidden rules come out of the environment. So what's a hidden rule? Hidden rules are unspoken. They're expectations, they're cues, they're habits, they're how you do business within this economic class so that it's a fit. So what works in one economic class actually may not work in another. But we don't use the judgment here of there are bad hidden rules and good hidden rules. So recently I had a question from an educator, and she said, how do I help my kids want to get away from just get by to getting ahead? And her assumption was all she had to say to them was, this, by not doing your homework, that's a get by choice. If you do your homework, that's a get ahead choice. What she didn't realize is that her fourth graders have no idea between get by and getting ahead. So the hidden rules that are part of home life and our community life may not actually resonate with what the hidden rules of the middle class might be, as that includes the organizations that we work for, that we develop. And it might not be the hidden rules that are the most powerful in our community. And so it goes back to looking at what is the environment and what are the hidden rules that make sense within that environment. We'll touch on that briefly today. The other two pieces of this are about internal resources. In other words, how does someone communicate? What are their strengths in communication? How does our organization use communication? How do the folks that come to our organization communicate? Do we need to make some adjustments there so that we can develop those relationships of mutual respect? And I can talk about that in a little while. And finally, what are the resources of the individual? So not only do we look at what are the strengths and resources within these different economic class environments, but we look at the individual. So you and I could be in this pie, let's say, in poverty and in generational poverty. And you have a parent or caregiver who says to you, I didn't make it out of poverty, but you're going to college, and I'm going to make sure you have every opportunity to possibly give you in order to do that. And I'm in the same income level, but my parent or caregiver is saying, you think you're getting above your raisin. You're going to end up just like me. This is who we are. And there is no expectation there that you will achieve. So we might have the same income, but what's happening and the richness of our internal resources, including our social capital, are very different. So it begins with this model of economic class, which we call the mental model for poverty. Now, where did it come from? Well, it came from getting ahead. So one of the first things that we do when we come to getting ahead is we draw a circle and we ask, what is poverty like? What do people do during their waking hours? Not what do people think, not what do people worry about necessarily, but what do people end up doing when they're in poverty? And we also have the same models for middle class and for wealth, generational wealth. And so here are the responses from various, and sometimes I've heard over 100 responses from getting ahead groups across the country have been used to develop this mental model of poverty. So as you can see, there's some interesting things that show up here. Legal issues, criminal justice. You can see how safety may be a huge issue. There can be debt. How can there be debt? Well, it's easy to be in debt when you're in poverty and you need to go to a payday lender in order to get $250, $300 to get the car fixed. So that is a 300% interest rate typically across the US. And as you can see, surrounding this mental model are the businesses that end up in our pockets of poverty that actually prey on people in poverty because they know that consumer base and they know that people believe in relationship and also need to have money fast. And they also know that when I'm in poverty, it's very stressful. And if people in poverty are stressful, they're also going to use entertainment to relieve that stress and want to look good to relieve that stress, want to look like everybody else. And so that debt comes from perhaps going to payday lenders or buying a car at a subprime rate at a used car lot in my neighborhood, which would be a buy here, pay here car lot. So debt is part of this. There can be mental health and chemical dependency problems. What we know is the research says that about 30% of us in poverty are depressed. Now, it's unclear as to whether the depression causes the poverty or the poverty causes the depression. But the fact is that it's very difficult to be in poverty. It's a very stressful environment, and it can be very discouraging. We know for a fact, because of population health research, that health issues are more prevalent and poor health is more prevalent in poverty. The first thing people want to think of is because they may not have, when we're in poverty, we may not have access to health care. We may not have the transportation, and we may not have the ability to actually be on time and go to a doctor's appointment. But actually what the population health research shows is that access to healthcare is only 10% of that disparity in health between those who have and those who don't have. And it's actually on a gradient. The more income and stability you have, the better your health is. So what is the cause? Well, the cause is stress, and the cause is a lack of social capital and the lack of support systems that we find in this model. In this what do you do in poverty model. Housing is, as Paulo Freire says, the engine that drives the chaos of poverty. And so if you have insecure housing and you're moving every 3 months, this is also very stressful. We know there's food insecurity, and I just touched on entertainment just briefly. I just want to mention again that I may want my nails to look good. I may want my kids to have what all the other kids at school have. I may actually spend money rather than paying the rent on cable. And this is an issue for many people in middle class because, we had a young woman go through getting ahead, and she was smoking to the tune of $300 a month. And so I thought that she should actually quit smoking as her #1 step to her self-sustainability, right? She should quit smoking so she could pay her rent. She had 8 steps on her plan. Number 8 was to quit smoking. Number 1 was to get out of bed every morning. So as you look at this, what kind of stress causes me to have my very first step in my plan to sustainability to be get out of bed every morning? I got to tell you, I wouldn't have started there, for that person. It turned out it was a health issue. It was migraines. Number 4 was to complete her 4-year degree, and number 8 was to quit smoking. I saw her a year later. She was at number 4. She had completed her higher ed and was looking for a job. And I saw her 2 years later, and she was at number 8, and she had a patch on, a cessation patch. What I'm saying is we don't always know why people make the decisions that they make unless we can get inside of this model. So the entertainment piece may not make sense from a middle class perspective, from a perspective of you don't have fun until you get the bills paid, but it does make sense when you live in an environment where the bills are never paid. Now, I spent quite a bit of time on this, but I want to say to you, this is the key to everything bridges. So basically, you look at this and you say, this is now. This is the tyranny of the moment. This is where I really don't believe in choice and future story. If you can see that, you can begin to make the changes at the individual, institutional, community policy levels that need to be made, along with individuals in poverty coming shoulder to shoulder with you in that work. This is the key, because if you don't have an accurate and have an understanding of the mental model of poverty in your community, and it can be changed a little, it can be transformed to be a fit for your community, then everything we do, all the plans we make, all the policies we make may fall flat, and we spend a lot of time and energy and get nowhere. And I think a lot of us know this is what happens on the ground a lot. I need to move on. I just wanted to show you what the stress of poverty looks like. So this is what it's like now in the tyranny of the moment. A woman went to work. She had 3 jobs and 3 kids. So very quickly, she went to work and she went through a yellow light. A camera took her picture when the light turned red. It was a $500 fine. She didn't have the money, so she put that fine aside. She kept driving because she had to get to work. She's a single mom, 11 years old, 8 years old, 4 years old. Those are her kids, okay, all girls. So she keeps going to work, she keeps doing her thing. She kind of forgot about the ticket. She's pulled over for having a tail light out. There's a warrant for her arrest, and her license has been suspended. She's put in jail. When she went to jail, she lost her 3 jobs. When she lost her 3 jobs, she couldn't go to work to make the money to pay the rent. She's going to lose her housing. Now, as you can see here, it says that relationships are my primary driving force and resource, because my other resources have eroded over time in poverty. Relationships are still my key resource, but she had a crisis, a relationship crisis. Think about this. She's in jail, 3 kids at home. She needs a relationship, somebody to help her out of jail, number 1. Number 2, somebody, or maybe number 1 is have somebody watch her kids while she's in jail. She said that her sister was a drug addict and that she was not sending them with her. And she said the neighbors were beating their own kids up and she didn't want them watching her kids. And she trusted the 11-year-old. And many times, many of you in education see, working with young people, see children who have taken on a parent role for themselves and their siblings. And that's what is happening here with the 11-year-old. And so basically, the courts knew that she was in jail, that she was a single parent. So they sent someone to check on the kids. So when they found the kids were home alone, they took her kids and they were put into foster care. Can I remind you, this all started when she went through a yellow light that turned red. And I have had many people judge her for going through that yellow light, but I think many of us know that we have either intentionally or non-intentionally gone through a yellow light in our lives. The issue here is the resources were so low that she couldn't stop bad things from happening. That's why this is the tyranny of the moment. When one thing happens, your resources are so tentative. One explosion turns into 5 explosions and a complete disaster, and you end up in crisis. Please don't think that people in poverty create drama. When I was working in social services and education, I would sometimes hear that in the staff lounge. These people create their own drama. Poverty creates drama because the resources are low. It's a different way to look at it. Now, as you're looking at this, I've had people come up to me and say, my gosh, this is me. Well, you know what? It is not you. Even if you're in this environment, this is not you. This is a picture, not of a person, but of poverty. And you are dealing with that. But you may be a resourced individual. You probably have resources that other people don't have. You have the ability to survive. You are strong. There's something there. Every person has at some aspect of them, some resource that we can look at. And therefore, we think that it's very important to look at people in poverty as problem solvers. When you're looking at this, if you're feeling a little judgment, I'd like you to ask you to think about what lens you're using right now. And if it's a lens of judgment, it usually comes from our own experience of economic class, either growing up or what we have developed over the years. So those are 2 key points of the Bridges lens. Number 1, what is the lens I'm using? Before I apply this to anyone else, I have to look at my own experiences and what hidden rules and environments have I been associated with that may create a lens when I'm working with other people. Secondly, all people in all economic classes are problem solvers. If you are problem solving using these resources, it's going to look very different than if you're problem solving with stable resources or abundant resources. So instead of judging people's decision, it's time to step back and look and say, what are the resources this person has within this environment? There is no doubt that this model is the core to Bridges out of poverty, because many of us will find individuals in our community that have no idea what poverty was. When I was a teacher, before Ruby wrote Framework for Understanding Poverty for Schools, we thought 50% free and reduced lunch. At my school, I know that the teachers thought, and I was one of them, that poverty was just like middle class, just with a little less money. It was so wildly different, and we had actually no idea. And therefore, we often failed to make those relationships of trust that our students needed, and to be able to say to our kids, look, you know, we always knew there were different hidden rules with kids, but we'd say, you leave those out of school rules out of school, and you use the in school rules when you're here. But basically, the implication was the rules of this world were the bad rules, the bad hidden rules. And the rules of school were the good hidden rules. Well, you know what? Kids and adults need their survival hidden rules if they're going to live in this place. It's just they need another set of hidden rules to survive in this place, which are schools, social services, police, religious organizations, as well as business, the business sector. All use this achievement-driven model of stability. This is a place where a job is a career. Why? What's the difference between, job in poverty and career here? Well, it's future story. If you think about it, most decisions are made based on the future story in the middle class. In poverty, it's more about the now. So when you look here throughout this, you see health and prevention, social media, family and friends, lots of social capital. They say that kids in this world have 4.5 after-school activities every week, opportunities to meet and engage with people other than their parents who are nurturing and positive in their lives, which Search Institute says every child needs 3 people other than their caregivers who are nurturing and positive. In this world, 1.2 after-school activities every week and less opportunity to build that bridging social capital. Education is a focus here, moving forward, getting ahead. And the number one thing I want to talk about here and ask you to write down, if you're new to Bridges especially, is planning. Plans help you to achieve stability and maintain stability. This is a place that grows plans. I mean, they grow like weeds here. So if you have stability, you can grow plans. So I always ask my audiences, do you have a to-do list? And many people say yes. And I said, do you cross off when you do something on your list? And everyone says yes. And then I say, are you one of those people that does something that's not on your to-do list? And after you've done it, you go to your to-do list and you write it down and you cross it off, right? So what is that? That's a sense of, okay, I know what I've done and I haven't done, but let's be honest, there's that little zing of achievement. I have done something. This is the environment that grows plans. This environment does not grow plans. It destroys plans. So therefore, we don't supposed to talk about plan A and plan B here. If that plan A doesn't work, you got to make a few changes. This is a decimation of plan A. And so how do you begin to help individuals here begin to learn to plan when in an environment that doesn't grow plans? Through the Bridges lens, it is possible to do this, but without trust in those individuals and without the individuals in poverty also understanding the environments and the hidden rules, it's not going to happen. So you have to realize when you are saying something, this is the world of, I just got bad luck. And when you were talking about the messages of school and health and achievement and getting ahead, those are messages of you make your own luck. Almost everything we say in these organizations and institutions, every time a message comes out of our mouth, whether it's you need to follow this treatment plan to be healthy, you need to study this in order to pass this test, you need to do this in order to get your kids back, whatever it is, it's you make your own luck. It's very choice driven. Think about this. You're choice driven here, working with a population that doesn't believe in choices. The only thing that you can do is begin to look at this and begin to say, how do we establish the trust necessary for someone to have a larger perspective rather than me just saying, here's the plan, here's the plan, here's the plan. That's futile. This is the world of wealth. It's all about connections and having wealth for future generations. There's a lot of power here. This is probably, this is the economic class that has the most power. And what are connections? Connections are those individuals that you connect with that help you to have more security, more abundant resources, and better life in the future for your kids and grandkids and so forth. So what's the difference between this and middle class? Well, here my connections go 100 years into the past, and my asset development goes 100 years into the future. It's very long term, and it's very intricate in terms of connections. People here are often on our boards of directors, and they have connections to the media and have power. So what we suggest is, instead of just having the middle class at the table, you have individuals in poverty as well as wealth and everything in between. There are economic classes in between these three models to move forward. Okay, in your community. So we have 12:45, so I have just a few more minutes to talk to you. Here are the hidden rules of economic class. And you can see just briefly, I want to look at destiny. In poverty, belief in fate. In that environment of poverty, there's not much future story. There's not much you can do to mitigate your future story, so you don't really believe in choice either. Now, you will have individuals in poverty who do believe in choice, who do plan, but I'm telling you right now, they're superhuman folks, and that is awesome. And you will find those folks, and that is to be celebrated. But the expectation that everyone in poverty would believe in plan and choice when it doesn't create plan, when poverty environments do not create that, that expectation is off the mark. And that's what Bridges helps us to understand, to see. Middle class believes in choice, can change future with good choices now. And you could write this down. You make your own luck works in the middle class. It doesn't always work in poverty, because one thing happens and boom, 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 all those explosions that you saw. Wealth, noblesse oblige, means we just got good luck. In other words, we have been born privileged. We did absolutely nothing to earn this wealth and this stability that we have, these abundant resources. Therefore, we need to give back to our community. So in a sense, you make your own luck doesn't work here either, because you have not made your own luck. You have been born into it. So when you buy a Bridges book or any of the Bridges series, you will find the hidden rules. You go through a full Bridges workshop. We talk about the hidden rules. But just briefly, we look at time in the present in poverty, middle class, very future oriented, and actually that the wealth in the past, the connections in the past, where we come from, that sort of decorum is very important in the generational wealth. Here's the community sustainability grid and the 4 causes of poverty. Sure, my individual behaviors can cause poverty, but so can a lack of human and social capital in the community. I can have the best job skills in the world, but if my community doesn't have jobs, or if I go to a school where that school cannot get certified teachers to come and doesn't have resources, and the school is falling apart, how am I expected to achieve and to learn in such an environment? Our communities need resources too. Exploitation, I just want to mention to you briefly, we talk about discrimination. We talk about the history of exploitation for certain populations. We also talk about the predators that society allows in communities, those businesses we were talking about earlier. Finally, political and economic structures can also create poverty or to help us to have sustainable lives. So what we want you to look at here is that all 4 of these cause poverty, and we need to address all 4 of these areas if we want to do something about it. Many times what you see is we have communities that argue about what causes poverty and then nothing gets done. Many Bridges communities use this to get people to settle down, to realize that they all agree with one another, so they can actually begin to work together and get something done in order to help people achieve stability. If you're interested, we have these roadmaps for how do you launch a Bridges initiative, how do you use emotional poverty, how do you use Bridges to health and healthcare. Please let me know, and we will be able to get you access to these, which I believe are on the website, ahaprocess.com, but if you need help finding these, let me know. These are the registers of language, very briefly. The middle class and wealth tend to use the formal language register. It's the language of the abstract. In poverty, in some studies, 80% of individuals who are adults in poverty had only casual register, which was at max 800 to 1,000 word vocabulary and very dependent on nonverbals. Also, so what you find is that, and you may be doing this now, your paperwork is in formal register. You're asking someone to complete this paperwork and you're translating it in the same, in English, into casual register so someone knows what they're signing. The formal register can be very intimidating if we're using formal register. So for example, in medicine, an oncologist said to somebody, your husband is neutropenic. This person did not know what neutropenic meant. So she said neutropenic, and he explained at risk of infection. Sometimes in poverty, I won't ask that question. I don't want that doctor to look at me as if I'm stupid. I think everybody knows what neutropenic is except me. So there are different ways of communicating. In the middle class, it's get to the point. You get 2 minutes to chit chat and you get to the point, and that's the expectation. In poverty, I might need 10 minutes for you to see me. I need to tell you why I missed my last appointment. And it starts with one child was expelled from school. I found out my daughter was pregnant. Then my husband was incarcerated. This story goes on for 10 minutes. If you look at your watch before 10 minutes, you just broken relationship. There's different ways of communicating. Who's to say which is right and which is wrong? If most of your population is using the casual register and your organization expects you to do 10-minute intervals and get something accomplished with someone, you're going to have an issue. The institution needs to understand communication is key to trust. And finally, here are our internal strengths. So if you look here, we are saying poverty is more than financial. Our definition of poverty is the extent to which people do, not without just money or financial assets, but other emotional, internal, and external assets. I say external because that bonding and bridging social capital there in the palm of the hand, that is those that help us get by, our bonding social capital, and those that help us get ahead, our bridging social capital. If you'd like more information on that very quickly, look up Robert Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone. These are his terms. I think it's our model, but these are his definitions of social capital. Financial, obviously, goods, services, income, and assets. Mental is cognition. Emotional, this is our coping strategies. And sometimes you'll find that people are under a lot of stress, but they're still not using drugs. They're still not getting drunk. They're still intentional parents. You know, they're still trying their best. They're coping as best they can. And so we give a higher score. You see the 1 through 5, 5 is above average. Spiritual and cultural on this finger because it points the way. Physical on the thumb because we use our thumb so physically. It's like our health. You don't even think about it until you wake up broke and you broke both thumbs. You'd have to think about it. It's like our health. Down at the bottom, knowing more than one set of hidden rules. This is the interesting thing, that no matter what economic class we're in, we can use the hidden rules of any economic class as long as we know them, which would make us successful to survive poverty, but also help us have a better shot of getting ahead in the middle class environments in which we find ourselves when we're in poverty, day after day, at school, at work, and in other agencies. So I'm just showing you this because Dr. Michael Marmot, Population Health, says if you're going to use any model and you want it to work, it's got to have two things. It has to have models for environments, which are so powerful in our lives, and models for individual strengths, which are so also powerful. And after the fact, I read this and realized Bridges had both. And I'm still, celebrating that. And I wanted to bring that to your attention as well. So what is Bridges? It's a lens change. It is not a program. It is not, Getting Ahead is a program, but Bridges is the voyage. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So Bridges gives us new eyes in order to look at what we do every day, to look at planning, to look at policy, to look at institutional change, and to look at how we live our lives. Many people come to me after Bridges and just say this: I couldn't just help thinking of myself and my own experience throughout the day. And that's really where it begins. It's time for questions. So let's see if we have any. Well, it seems like we do. Okay, I've got a lot of introductions, so welcome to all of you. I'm looking down here to see if there's any questions. You don't get to see other participants and their questions, which is a tragedy actually, but that is the way it is in webinars. And Antoinette is asking, what was the author's name? His name is Robert Putnam, P-U-T-N-A-M, and he wrote Bowling Alone. What is full-length training? Thank you, Joe. A full-length training is usually a 6-hour training. It could be provided by one of the national AHA presenters, such as myself, that is coming to your community, and your organization can actually call AHA process to engage that. We also have certified trainers in our community who are certified to give the full 6-hour training, which is everything I just mentioned today, the Bridges lens, starting with the models and the research and the hidden rules, the language and the internal resource hand. This full-length training is available sometimes through your community partners. So if one of your community partners has gone through and gotten the certification, they can train your entire staff. And sometimes if you're not their partner, they can give you a 2-hour overview, or you can contact us. So if you are interested, just let me know and I will connect you. So after the change of mindset, how do we help support change and the getting ahead? Well, I think that it takes some time to look at the change of mindset. You have to talk to a lot of people. You have to, actually engage people in poverty. You have to look at your own system. So that takes some time. So, for example, in that dental group I was telling you about, those changes in their mindset, they presented Bridges to all of the staff in all of the 250 dental offices. So that was the first thing, is to look at changing the lens. Then they began to say, what makes sense that we do with this group of individuals in poverty, and what doesn't make sense? What do we need to change at the individual, institutional, and community policy level? So that is different within each sector, and we have sector champions who can help with that. So again, let me know if you need more information about that. You can get a book. How can I get more information about how Bridges has affected policy in Ohio? The book is called, what is the book called? I'll get that for you in a second. But Phil Duvall and Gene Krebs, former legislator in Ohio, have written a book called, I know this book like the back of my hand. Can you help?
Bridges Across Every Divide.
Bridges Across Every Divide. Thank you very much. So Bridges Across Every Divide, oh gosh, thank you, Ruth, is the book that talks about what happened in Ohio. And you can get that at ahaprocess.com, probably at Amazon too, but start with us first. My email address is coming, so I will have that up momentarily. Policy in Oklahoma had been impacted by Bridges. I think the number one thing about Oklahoma is that the entire state is a Bridges community, and they have meetings at the state level. I think that it's still, I'm not sure, but I know it was originally initiated by the Salvation Army. So again, I can give you more information on that. But it is a huge endeavor and very, very impressive in Oklahoma. Are there resources to get an organization to begin changing culture and accepting this training? The first thing is to have the training, and the second thing is you may need some follow-up, and sometimes that follow-up includes having an additional training, but sometimes we can do this through conference calls and so forth. There are resources for you, and I'd like to mention that there are, if I can go back here to my slides. There is, you don't need Jim's actual email address there. Sorry, that was still included. That was supposed to be. There's my email address, tdsmithbridges@gmail.com, as well as here are some of the sectors that have their own work. The health sector, higher education, criminal justice, schools, business. We have the workplace stability book and trainings. So we have branched out into different sectors. So once you look at the general bridges, you may decide to have more specific training for your sector or for other sectors. This is recorded, and I do believe you will get a link to that recording. And thank you for saying I did a great job. It's kind of hard to put the Bridges lens into 45 minutes, but hopefully this gives you an overview of what it is. So there is no study yet that shows the impact of bridges, because bridges is a lens change. It is difficult to study that, right? But look at getting ahead. And there are studies that show what how getting ahead outcomes have been changing lives and communities. And that's included in Oklahoma as well. So getting ahead is where those evaluations are easier to determine, because it is a curriculum, whereas bridges is not. It's not a curriculum, it's just a lens. So it's very difficult to pinpoint how changes have occurred based on this lens. It is 101. And let me put my email address up again. I hope to hear from many of you, and that would be wonderful for me and a great opportunity to connect with you. Lynn Jackson, ljackson@ahaprocess.com, is our Bridges community developer and manager, and she knows what's happening across the country with bridges and in several countries actually. So she is also a great resource for you. I look forward to hearing from you. I want to thank you so much for being here today, and you have a great day, and hopefully you will use and continue to use bridges as a lens and as well as getting ahead. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.